Hey folks, this is Jason Lewis, the producer of the From the Shadows podcast. I just want to remind you about our website, FromTheShadowsPodcast.com. We have a Facebook page. We would appreciate it if you like and follow. Also, join our discussion group on Facebook called After the Shadows. We have a Twitter feed. Please follow us on Twitter. It can be found with @podcast_from. Follow us on Instagram at From the Shadows Podcast. We have a YouTube channel. Go to the search bar at YouTube and put From the Shadows Podcast, and please subscribe to that channel. We are also on the Odyssey Radio Network, and we can be found there at odyssey1.com. We're still on the traditional podcatchers that everybody loves to listen to us on. We get a lot of feedback, so please rate the podcast and communicate with whether you're on Spotify, Stitcher, TuneIn, Apple Podcasts, Podbean, or Google Podcasts. We're there, and we appreciate it when you leave comments for us. We also have a Patreon page. It can be found at www.patreon.com/FromTheShadows. You can receive books, stickers, coffee mugs, and special content just for our Patreon subscribers. Check it out for yourself and see what packages that we have to offer. Well, that's all I have for you right now, folks, and thanks for being a part of the From the Shadows podcast family. So with that being said, let's get this episode started.
Howl, we were just talking a little bit off air. It's Halloween.
That's right.
We live out here in the country. We had our nephew showed up with some candy.
Right.
They had been, Christy's mom been taking them around, get some candy, and they showed up here. We hardly even had anything for them.
Because you don't have a candy for strangers, or you just don't.
We just don't have candy, period. And I almost tricked the boys. I had them convinced that the whole idea from Halloween was when they showed up at somebody's house without candy, they were supposed to give some of their candy to those less fortunate.
Well, did you have your light turned on, or what made them come there? Just because they thought
it's just because Christy's mom brought them over. So it's the nephews. So they come in and they sat down on the floor and they started divvying out stuff they were going to give to us. So I got some suckers and nothing with much chocolate on it. To me, candy ain't candy unless it's chocolate.
Yeah, but, that's right.
Mm-hmm. So I did get I got a little bit of Halloween candy, and I didn't even have to go trick or treating. Although I felt bad when he dumped the little one, dumped his bucket out there. He had an apple in there. I thought, well, poor kid, who's getting an apple?
I was going to say, you know what? I'd be skeptic. People give apples, put razor blades in them.
Hey, though, that is an urban legend to the point where that people did research on that, and that never even happened one time that somebody put a razor blade in an apple. That's completely made up from, what was it, Halloween 2 or 3 or something?
Was that what it was? I don't watch scary movies. So.
Yeah, from one of those movies, that was the basis of it. So, so yesterday I celebrated my birthday.
Yeah, that's what I didn't want to say that, but yeah, your birthday is always the day before Halloween.
Always the day before Halloween.
No wonder you're so superstitious.
I was waiting for you to say, no wonder I'm wearing either I should be wearing a mask all year long, or it looks like I am wearing one.
So what'd you do for your birthday?
Nothing. I went to a basketball scrimmage and then watched the Buckeyes Saturday night. That's it. That was the Buckeyes game was pretty scary, but you get to a certain age, and I think last year was the big 5-0. So I think it's going to be anticlimactic for the rest. I just think it's more of how many more can I make? You know what I'm saying?
I had 20 of them yesterday, so.
You had 20 birthdays?
In one day. Yeah, I had 20 in one day.
Something happened that made you age?
Well, I had a friend of mine from high school. His daughter got married. Okay. And she was the miniature bride in my wedding, and there was a bunch of people that I worked for back in those days, but I was essentially gone for 20 years, right?
Yeah.
So, boom, you're put into a position where people don't know, like my buddy whose daughter it was, I've interacted with him a lot since I moved back. So, he's the father of the bride, and he came over and got me and said, "Hey, you're never going to guess who's here. I want, I'm going to," and he told me this guy we used to work with and brought him over here. And once that guy got there, I knew, as he was walking up, I knew exactly who he was. You know what I mean? And I
Mhm.
think it was because he was older. When a dude is 40, the last time you seen him, and he's 60 now,
Ooh, that's a
that,
jump.
well, I was going to say, but unlike 31 to 51. Does that make sense? So I was 31 when these people saw me last. Now I'm 51. I would like to think that my transition was more. Does that make sense?
Okay.
Anyway, to make a long story short, he says that my buddy says, I told him that was you sitting over there, and they were they didn't know if they should believe me or not. They said you kind of look like me. And this is where he got and then this guy came over, this old coworker came over and started laughing and yucking it up, and he said, my buddy Paul said, "Hey, tell him what you said," and he was embarrassed to say it. And I said, "No, go ahead and say it." And he goes, "Well," and Paul said, he's going to take it as a compliment. And I said, "What?" And he said, when Paul asked, "Hey, what do you think of Jeff?" Before he said, "That's him sitting over there, right?" You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
what do you know about him, or what do you think about what he's doing now, or something like that. And the guy says, "Well, if you tell me he's a millionaire, I'll believe you. But if you tell me he's in jail, I'll believe that too." So it's, and I laughed. I said, "That's right." He said, "I didn't know. I didn't know where he was going to end up, But
Thin line, right, between
I
millionaire and
said,
convict.
hopefully, I'm going to both, unless they put me in jail for my millions, like Bernie Madoff or something. But you know, but they were all old cops. They were all old cops, and old cops just don't age very well. You know what I mean?
No, it's hard. It's hard, right? Hard life.
Well, I think part of it too is when some of these people, like a lot of professions, right? Not just the cops or whatever, but when people, I was sitting there, and the barber that cut my hair for years until he retired. Every time I'd come home for Christmas or Thanksgiving or something, I'd make it a point to go to the barber shop and get my hair cut, right?
Yeah.
And he finally just retired after 51 years about 2 years ago. I haven't seen him in 2 years, and he was sitting over there, and you'd have thought I was Santa Claus the way he acted, because he's just retired back to the farm. But when you see these people, and the last time you seen them, they're in their late 30s to mid 40s, maybe late 40s, and they're still kind of macho tough guys. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. Oh
Okay,
yeah.
and then you basically, you never see them like me. I didn't see them age because I left, and then I come back and they're in their mid 50s to mid 70s, and holy cow, some of them just look like frail old men, and I knew them as badasses. Does that make sense? So
Oh yeah.
it was kind of a I don't want to use the term bittersweet, because I'm not a writer or philosopher like that, but you know what I mean. It was kind of weird in some ways.
Yeah, it is because, well, and this is kind of going on, taking a left turn there, but I have spoken with you at length and on here about my old man, about my
Okay.
dad.
Uh-huh.
Okay. And my dad died when he was 49, and he was a bad dude. I mean,
Up
but
into
he
the
was
end.
up until the end. He was still riding his motorcycle. He was in pretty good shape. Um, I mean, he could have probably sat down and arm wrestled the best of the best around here, shooting, gun toting, just a bad dude, just a tough dude. And I often wondered, like, man, what would have been like to see, because that's 1996 is when he died. I mean, we're coming up 25 years, right? He's been gone 25 years. like I can't imagine him 75 years old. You know, like what, like just like you said, what would he look like as a 75-year-old guy? You know, would he still be
Right.
trying to be tough to and you know what's really like strange, and I don't know how much of I don't know if we've ever discussed this about so my dad never really knew his real dad. His dad, my grandma, was married to a guy, had my dad. This guy went to the armed service, you know, went to during World War II, got out, apparently did not, you know, like the idea of coming back in and being a husband and a father, left the house and went back and rejoined during World War II and just left my dad and my grandma. Okay. So my grandma gets married to the guy that I know as my grandpa, who adopts my dad. Well, so my dad goes through the rest of his life because my grandma's bitter about this guy, bitter to the very. And my dad never knew what happened to his dad because my grandma was super tight-lipped, would not say anything. But I believe she knew where he went and what happened to him. So my dad basically died thinking that his dad never came back to look for him. You know,
And you
just
think
left him.
that ate on him?
Oh yeah. That had a lot to do with I think of how much he drank, the anger he had inside towards me. But what happened then 5-6 years ago is I kind of looked up some and tried to find some relatives of this guy that was my dad's real dad. And I found a couple of them, an older lady and her husband. So she would have been my dad's cousin, lived down south, and then a cousin that's about my age, lives in Florida or whatever. Well, this lady had told me kind of about my uh, true grandpa, so to speak, or whatever, and what kind of person he was, and everything. But she also told me that he was shot and killed in a bar in
Your
South.
dad's biological dad.
My dad's biological dad was shot and killed. She goes, this was the story that everybody in the family knew. Sometime in the 60s in southern Ohio, in a town, you know, she didn't know the name of the town at the time, but that he was in a bar. A guy walked into the bar dressed as a cowboy, kicked open the doors and says, if there's a man in here, you know, or ask, is there a man in here? And of course, my dad's biological dad, they said, was always the first one to say, you know, jump at a challenge, jumps up and says, here, you know, here I am. And this guy dressed as a cowboy pulls out a gun, shot and kills him. Okay. Dead. So I'm sure my grandma knew that my dad's real dad had been dead since the 60s and never never told
because
him.
she was embarrassed he got shot in the bar by
I
a
just,
cowboy.
I just think that she just
Now that's the difference in generations.
yeah.
Because
But the best thing is that older cousin sent me the newspaper article last week that said it was in a town called Lore City, which is at the edge of one of the national parks in southeast Ohio, and that his biology was only 42 years old. So neither one of them made it to their 50, made it to
so
their
you're
50th
already
birthday.
paid for. I mean, you made 51.
I'm on borrowed time, man. I'm like, this is free. I'm on house money. But it said in the article that the guy walked in the door and said, "Is there a man in here?" In quotes. And when my dad's biological dad stepped up, he shot and killed him. And it was on his birthday. He died on his 42nd birthday.
Which is why you don't do anything on your birthday.
That's, I guess that's
Except
one
for
way to
watch
start.
the Buckeyes. And
I'm
they
just gonna
survived
start.
yesterday, didn't they?
They did survive.
Now, what happened
I
to
got
the shooter? What happened to the cowboy? Did it say?
Yeah, well, yeah, he got convicted of shooting. He got convicted of shooting. So yeah, And here's the ironic thing is the next book I was writing for the book series that I have.
Yeah.
Part of the book so this is without knowing this was going to take place in Lore City, Ohio. I kid you not. Without
Something
knowing
in your
it.
psyche, your subconscious chose that.
Well, I had this, it's a fictional book, but I wanted a real town involved in it, and that was a real town with a kind of a cool name. Lore City is kind of a kind of spooky, I guess.
Well, what's funny is what I started to say is the changing of the times. I had a coworker up in Minneapolis, a guy that was a career federal law enforcement officer. He'd worked at ICE and Customs and went through the whole Homeland Security uh, transition and all this stuff, right? So these guys got into genealogy for some reason. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think it was because my buddy at the ripe old age of 50 decides he's going to get married and have a baby, and I'm not making that up,
Okay.
So
50.
yeah, he married a girl in her mid 30s, and they had this baby. So he's trying to figure out how he's going to really make this book to pass on to his kid in case he doesn't make it. You know what I mean?
Yep.
And in that, he basically, kind of like you said, he had his grandfather was kind of never spoken about. They didn't know, and he had died in a armed robbery. He was shot by the police in either St. Louis, Missouri, or St. Joseph, Missouri, in the late 30s. I don't think it was in the 40s. I think it was in the 30s. It might have been in the 40s. I think it was like 1939, right before the war. And he gets killed, and then the war happens, and no, everybody forgot everything, right?
Oh yeah.
But he plastered his office. Some people had what we call "I love me" walls with all those plaques and stuff. You know what I mean, and pictures and this stuff, right?
Yeah.
And he had an "I love me" wall full of FBI, Homeland Security, DHS plaques and crap. And then on the opposite wall, he had all these different clippings and all this stuff related to his outlaw grandpa who died in a fuselage of. And for some reason, I think he shot at the cops or shot a cop. You know what I mean? There was something where most people would go in there, dude, I can't believe you're showing people this. And he's like, well, what's the big deal? I don't, dude, it was 75 years ago, 80 years ago, But that's what I was going to say. Your generation to where people are embarrassed of criminals or whatever,
Well, I think everything was so hush hush back then. Like I think, when you hear about how people had kids and they got sent away, and
Right.
then they came back, and the kid was raised as the younger brother or the whatever,
Sister,
or the mom,
whatever,
and stuff, and it's like, what the heck? I mean,
yeah, and now, just think, well, it just goes back to gunfighting, right? You could be dressed as a cowboy in New Mexico and shoot somebody, and a week later you're in Martha's Vineyard shopping. So it don't much matter anymore, right? You get it kind of, and I'm nothing against him or anything, He didn't get the correct safety brief. I had an old sergeant major one time. You know what safety brief he'd give us?
whoa, what's that?
He would say, hey, the best people in the world, Delta, SEAL Team 6, the best people in the world have accidental discharges and accidentally shoot each other every once in a while. And you people aren't near the best people in the world, so you got to be double careful.
There you go. That's sound advice.
Mm-hmm.
That's sound advice.
On all things in life, you got to be double careful.
You gotta be good. All I know is once I heard this story and I really figured out that it was true, I thought, that's got to be, when somebody asks, give me two lies and a truth, or two truths and a lie, or whatever, I could put my grandpa was shot by a cowboy.
A cowboy.
Cowboy. And Who's gonna say that's the truth?
Yeah, and they're gonna, if it was me though, because I'm a borderline liar, I'd have to say Tom Mix or somebody shot him on a movie scene or something like that. You know what I mean? I would have to add more. I'd make it more spicy than just getting shot by. I was thinking Woody. I couldn't remember the cowboy
On Toy Story.
on Toy Story. Woody. Yeah, that's what when you're telling you dressed as a cowboy. That's what I'm thinking about. He kind of dressed as a cowboy. Well,
Hey, and by the way, speaking of cowboys, I don't know how I'm segueing into this, except that our recent guest, Tim Lovelace, who in the new movie Death Block 13 plays Tex. Okay.
Well,
we
there you have it.
We did get, for all of our loyal listeners that have been asking, and yes, there have been, for everybody that is sick of us talking about it, there's that many people that have been talking. On November 2nd, which is the day before this comes out, you can watch Escape from Death Block 13 if you have Amazon Prime Video, iTunes, Comcast, Vudu, Cox, Cable, DirecTV, Verizon, Dish, Spectrum, or Google Play. It's on demand on all of those channels. So if you have,
I'm buying it. I'm Amazon Priming it. I'm buying it and putting it in my library right next to Fat Man and Apocalypse Now Redo.
Oh boy,
be my trilogy.
Oh boy, you better start with Death Block and work your way.
That's right. That's right. I can't wait. This week, when was that? November 2nd?
November 2nd on Tuesday.
Yeah, I'm gonna be on it.
So
everybody needs to be on it. So when you're hearing this, you can go buy it right then.
Yeah, they can go get it on demand and watch it, and then let us know what you think, man. Let us know what you think.
Okay.
Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of the From the Shadows podcast. Until next time, never shy away from the darkness or what may be lurking in the shadows. We are out.